Not only was he a fan of Beethoven, he loved the slow movement of the Second Symphony of Beethoven's Second Symphony. He loved Mozart, Bach, and he would play. They had a piano, which was stolen from Jews. He would sit and play the piano. But with his right hand, he would play the piano, and with the left hand, with his pistol, they would bring him Jewish children. He loved to shoot Jewish children while he was playing Bach. That's how evil they were. But to them, the killing of the Jewish children was the most important thing, because it meant the prevention of the future of the Jewish people. This is the line. The elderly, he killed by the hundreds, but the young, adolescents, the people in the 20s, by the tens of thousands. So it says the following. Ve'ein sheket l'dam navi. The blood did not stop boiling. Vayehi lemofes va'ot. And it was a sign, it was a wonder. Ve'habanim nishchatim. The children were slaughtered. Ve'ene avos ra'os. And all their parents could do was just look and watch this. V'imosam lateva. And then after the young children, they brought the mothers. V'gam achareim ba'os. Va'omer l'nafshi. And I, meaning the embodiment of the Jewish people. Zeh chotasech. This is your sin. V'zeh pirya. And this is the fruit of that sin. Vayirev bevas Yehuda tani avani. Hosif larog nashim yom keshadai. Mothers who were carrying infant children were killed. V'gam ola b'neihem kedam yaor mitzrayim. The blood expanded. The blood came out of this, meaning the slaughter of Jerusalem. It appeared to us like the Nile River, the river of Egypt. Ad asher nasa Nebuzaradan liba l'shamayim, until finally the murderer himself, General Nebuzaradan, he turns to heaven. He turns to the God of the Jews. Vayomer ha'ein dai bivnos Yerushalayim. We haven't killed enough of the children, the daughters of Jerusalem, meaning the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Hakala ata oseh es she'iris hashivya. Do you want God that we should just annihilate? There should be no remnant. There should be no survivors. Should we kill them all? Now, those of you who are looking at the screen with Sefaria, that's the end of the Kina. But in the version I have, there's a last paragraph, and I want to read that last paragraph. At this point, Isaac, you can close down for now, close down the Sefaria. Now the Jewish people speak. L'cha chatanu Elokim. To you, God, have we sinned. Now, chet means we've missed the mark. We've been off target. Not just chatanu. Avinu, gershanu. No, it was premeditated. We did this in a wanton, blatant way. V'haragnu neviecha. We have killed your prophet. V'rishenu yadanu. And now we are aware of absolutely how wicked we have been. Yehi chastecha lenachamenu. Please, God, may your chesed extend, and may you comfort and console us. Ki misha'ol shivanu. Because out of the depths of the grave, some would say out of hell, out of Gehenna, we are crying out to you. But what it means is out of the grave. Umipri ma'alalenu, and the fruit of our sin, of our catastrophe, the fruit really of our corruption. Zeh kama savanu. We have been satiated with the consequences of what our own sins caused. Rachem lo ruchama. These are all quotes from Yeshaya, from Isaiah. The woman who can never be consoled, meaning the Jewish people, who can find no consolation. Hasoara haniya. The afflicted, the storm-tossed, afflicted one. Eineha lecha Tisha. Her eyes to you does she turn. Bezrascha. And for your salvation, for your aid, Sophia, does she yearn and long for. What was this idea that we have just studied, that we've just read? The idea is the following, that sometimes you're so hurt, you're so beaten down, you can't be introspective. You can't look in the mirror. You're just not yet capable. You have to build yourself up. This kinna comes from much later in the day. And as we said, it was authored, I believe, by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who lived from 1075 to 1141. And he is at this point in the day saying, instead of pointing the finger at the Almighty, we have to point the finger at ourselves, to look in the mirror. And no, it wasn't the whole Jewish nation that perpetrated this crime, but it was the whole Jewish nation that was not aghast, that did not demand a reckoning, that did not go into a national introspection. And what do you think? Because we're moving forward now. Olam kimin hagonoeg. The world must go on as the world turns, right? No. As a people, we have to confront and we have to address our own flaws. And out of Tisha B'Av comes that ability when all of the, so to speak, all of the lucky charms and all of the walls that we build around ourselves, to be a fortress to protect us, when that fortress comes crumbling down, then what do we have to do? Have to be introspective. It's time for truth. And that's the theme of this kingdom. Now, I don't know, Isaac, if they have it on Sefaria, but I want to go, in most volumes of the Kinos, there are a couple of modern Kinos that were written in our generation. We're going to do one that was written by, let me just find it first. Apologize. His name is Rabbi Shlomo Halberstam, the Bub of a Rebbe. Who was the Bub of a Rebbe? He died 20 years ago, literally 20 years ago today. Today's his yard site. It's Phil's mom's yard site, Lana Bas Yehuda HaKohen. The Bub of a Rebbe, his father was, Bobov was a town in Galicia. Okay. Halberstam produced many of these great Hasidic rebbeim. The Halberstam family lived initially during the period of what we call the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Western Galicia, which is areas like Krakow and Auschwitz, Central Galicia is Tarnov, Eastern Galicia is Tarnopol. Today it's the Ukraine, Tarnopol, and Lviv. The Ukrainian word is Lviv, in Polish, Lvov. When it was under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was known as Lemberg. Lemberg is a German name. The Austrians spoke German. Lemberg was the Vienna of Galicia. It was built, the engineering of it was similar to like what you had in Vienna. So after World War I, when there's no longer an Austro-Hungarian Empire, you have the creation of all these nations, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, you got Hungary, and Romania. Poland, which had not existed from the 1790s. Poland they first carved it up, the three great empires, Prussia, which became Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in the Tsarist Russia under Catherine, they carved up Poland, so it was no longer a country. It started in 1772. By 1793, it was all carved up. Most of it became Tsarist Russia. The southern part, Galicia, became the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the western part, Silesia, these areas became part of Prussia. Okay? So you have the following situation. Thank you. You have the following situation. After World War I, people start speaking Polish. In these Hasidic communities that existed throughout Western and Central and Eastern Galicia, it was mainly Hasidic, that area. Okay? The one who had the great influence on Western Galicia was the man that we call the Noam Elimelech, Reb Elimelech of Luzhensk. Through his students, that's where the Hasidic world spread. It was like it was a revolution. It was actually, I don't mean this in a political sense. It was a right-wing revolution, meaning what? The Austro-Hungarians wanted to, the word I'm looking for is integrate, assimilate is the word I'm looking for. Assimilate the Jews. They wanted them becoming Austrians. They wanted them, dressing like Austrians. They wanted them speaking German. They even set up Jewish schools with secular education, with very, very little Jewish education. They sent rabbis, Reform rabbis from Austria. And the response to that was the great Hasidic revolution in Galicia. It was really a response, not to the Misnagdim, it was a response to the Austro-Hungarian attempt to assimilate them. So the Baba Rebbe was one of these great Rebbeim. They had a whole lineage, the Halberstam. And the father was murdered by the Germans. Isaac, is it okay just to mute everybody else? The father was murdered by the Nazis. Most of the family was murdered. The young Mimale Makom, the successor to his father's name was Naphtali. His name was Shlomo. He escapes. He works in a labor camp. He's put into a labor camp. Buchnia it was called. He actually escaped, went to Budapest, and then from Budapest escaped to Romania. And he lived and he survived with one of his children as a slave laborer in Romania. Survived the war. Almost all of his Hasidim were wiped out in 1942, 1943. Very, very few survived. When he comes to America, they bring him to Borough Park. He was originally, another part of New York. I think he was originally on the west side. He settles in Borough Park. And it's interesting. Most of the Babaver Hasidim today are not people who descend from Galicia. They weren't Babaver Hasidim before the Nazis, before World War II. Most of them were just very impressed and became followers of Rabbi Shlomo Halberstam, the Babaver Rebbe. They respected him, they revered him. He was a great personality, really a wonderful, warm, kind, a great educator, a leader, a mentor. So most of those Hasidim really, they were Hungarian Hasidim. And by the way, when they came to Babov in the 1950s, 1960s, it really started to expand, and really he grew it in the early 1970s. It was sort of like a response to, think about America in the 1960s and the 1970s. Everything became free. They threw off all boundaries. And a lot of these Jews said, this America that we loved under Eisenhower, which had great American values, and we as Jews found these American values to be very in sync, and they dressed like you or I. But in the 70s, they started to go back to their roots as a response, as a reaction to the freeness, the wildness that was existing in America. So again, most Babaver Hasidim that you would meet in Borough Park today, they probably have Hungarian roots, they have other roots, because as you and I know, very, very few people survived Galicia. Just to give you numbers, Poland had 3.5 million Jews. Many of them fled as things were getting really ugly in the 30s. When the Nazis and the Soviets entered Poland on September 1st, 1939, we believe, and this is quite accurate, there were 3.3 million Jews living in Poland. Somewhere between 150 and 250,000 of them fled east, fled to Russian-controlled territory. Many of them, about 50 to 60% of them survived. Siberia, some went to Uzbekistan, they went all different, wherever you could go, Kazakhstan. So 50 to 60% of those people survived. I mean, that's a terrible number. But of the 3 million that remained in Poland, the famous historian Saul Friedlander says, and these numbers are very, very accurate, meaning that the low number is as low as it gets, the high numbers is the most optimistic number. Of the 3 million that were in Nazi-controlled Poland, somewhere between 25 and 35,000 survived. That's 1%. So again, there's over 100,000 that survive in Russian-controlled territory. Maybe it's 150,000, we're not sure, somewhere between 100 and 150,000. But of those that were in German-controlled territory, 1%, between 25 and 35,000 Jews survived. So you figure it out yourself. How many Babava Hasidim survived? Almost no one. He was on the west side, then he establishes himself in Borough Park. And his Hasidim said to him, Rebbe, write something for the Shoah, for the Holocaust, that we can say on Tisha B'Av. The way it was told to me by Rabbi Herbst, and Rabbi Herbst was very close with the Babavuk Rebbe for many, many years. I interviewed Rabbi Herbst about the Rebbe. He claims that you're looking at maybe he sat down for an hour, 40 minutes. He wrote it very, very quickly. It's fairly short. It's not very long and exhaustive. And this is something not only do Baba Hasidim and Borough Park say, but you and I say this on Tisha B'Av. You and I say this each and every year. So I apologize. I'm going to make a comment to Isaac. I don't know if you can find it. In this book, it's Kina 48. Zichru na v'konanu kol Yisrael. Zichru na v'konanu kol Yisrael. I don't know, Isaac, if Sefaria has it or they don't. If they do, if you can put it up. If not, because we've got about a 15-minute stop time, I'm going to read through it and make a few significant comments.
They don't have it.
Okay, I didn't think so. Remember, always remember, Zichru, it's a command. Always, never, ever forget this. V'konenu kol Yisrael. Any Jew, whether you're a Sephardic Jew, a Yemenite Jew, whether you went through the Holocaust or not, never, never stop mourning. Kolchem yishama birama. Let your voice be heard in heaven, on high. Ki hishmida Germania esamenu b'meizam hamilchama. Because the German Empire and their allies, the Lithuanians, the Polish Catholics, the Romanians, the Latvians, the Estonians, the Ukrainians, the Dutch, the Vichy government in France, the Austrians, they brought, in the time of Zam is the time of those furious, horrific days of war, they annihilated our nation. Bemisos mishunos arzarios, with extremely horrific and painful murders. Beravu v'tzama, by putting us into ghettos, and having a diet of 250, 300 calories a day. We starved to death. But think about the life expectancy in Mauthausen, the famous work camp with the quarries in Austria. Life expectancy was 6 weeks. Auschwitz, for those who were slave laborers who were not killed the day they came, life expectancy was 10 weeks. Okay? The Rav of Utzama, with famine. Al tishkuchu b'chol doros, throughout history, throughout the millennia, in all generations, never forget this. Adei tisku leros benechama. Until we can finally see the comfort. We have the Messianic era. In the world will be restored to a time of state of perfection. Until that time, never ever forget this. Tzakasam v'chiyosehem. Their cries, their shrieks, tzfufim uskurim bakronim, how they were cramped into the cattle cars, how they were slammed there, how many people died just being crammed in where you couldn't even sit or stand. Those 2-3 day journeys in the hot summer or in the frigid winter. Katzon latevach yuvalu. This is a quote from Isaiah the prophet, from Yeshaya. Like sheep to the slaughter they were brought. L'sreifa b'kivshonim, to be burnt in the ovens. Kol shavam yizacher tamid b'fnei shochein ma'onim. The voice of their cry, may it always be heard before the Almighty. Bikaram Shema Yisrael. As they called out Shema Yisrael, Masru Nafsham La'Adonai Adonim. The very last words on their lips were the vidoy, the confession. The very last words on their lips were singing Shema Yisrael, declaring the unity of God, God's mastery of the universe. Who were they? Rashi Yeshivos v'Talmidehem, the Hamonei Amcha Shama, the heads of the yeshivas, their students, the masses. What's the point? I don't know if we've ever discussed this, but think about in 1939, when SS Commandant Odilia Globachnik establishes the headquarters in Lublin. Anything west of Lublin, that was annexed and became part of Germany. Hans Frank in Krakow, he ran there. But the east, it was called the general government. Odilia Globachnik was running the Lublin district. In Lublin was a famous yeshiva. The yeshiva established by the great Rabbi Meir Shapiro, Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin. It's an incredible, incredible yeshiva. It was the greatest yeshiva in all of Poland. They didn't have yeshivas. They had people would live in this house or that house, and then they'd sit in the shul and learn. This was an incredible yeshiva, a beautiful building. They had food in the dormitory. They had a dormitory, they had food, they fed the students. And people, when they died, they donated their libraries to this great yeshiva. It was one of the greatest libraries on earth. In this yeshiva, the goal was to produce the rabbis, to produce the rabbinate for world Jewry. It wasn't just a place to learn, but through the best educators in the world, they would train these young men and send these young men all over the world to impact the Jewish people. One of the first things that was done when they conquered that area, they drove everybody out of the yeshiva, they shut it down. But there's a beautiful courtyard in front of the yeshiva. And they took, like we said, maybe the greatest Jewish library in Europe. Not as precious and rare as the things you have in the Bodleian in Oxford. Not as precious and rare as some of the material that you have in the Vatican. But from a point of view of a library, nothing like it. And they had the Nazi film crews. They had like these Hollywood-like producers. And they filmed this incredible bonfire. The burning of the Sifrei Kodesh, of the Svarim, the holy Svarim, in the courtyard outside the yeshiva. And that's what they showed in the German movie houses. Between the double feature, they made all the Jews of Lublin watch this as they had this massive burning. And they took over that building. The building was so nice, they didn't want to destroy it. They used it as a headquarters. They took over the yeshiva as a Nazi headquarters. Rashi Yeshiva Talmidehem. Not only that, Hamonei Amcha Shama, that the masses of Jews in villages, towns, cities, Havidum Beinuyim Kashim. They afflicted them with terrible, terrible oppression. V'haragum b'yad ramah. In the way they murdered them in such an insolent way. Demei yeladim rakim tzolkim elecha min adama. The blood of these innocent children that were murdered. When you go to Poland, just one example of that, they took all the children from Tarnów. Tarnów was an incredible city. 44 of the 66,000 residents of Tarnów were Jewish. Every type of Jew you could imagine. Every group of Hasidim, every group of this political group you could imagine. It was an incredible city. But one day they marched out the children. They took them literally, wrenched the children from the parents. Over 800 children in one shot. And they marched them, and there was a mass grave That mass grave we discovered because we're Polish Catholics who remembered what happened, and they murdered those children there. So we have it demarcated. That's the blood of the little children crying out. Nikom nikmas tafinashim lo sechaya kol neshama. Please, God, please take vengeance over the murder and the slaughter of innocent women and children, where our oppressors would not even allow a single one to live. Al sreifas alfei midrashos ubati keneshos. The thousands and tens of thousands of places that people gathered to learn at night after work, of shuls, of yeshivas, the Torah that was produced, that was studied, that was transformative in the lives of people throughout these multiple countries, throughout the European continent. Shilchu ba'esh mikdashei kel. The houses of God. Yechezkel refers to as a mikdash ma'at. The shuls and bati midrashos went up in fire. Itzitzu ve'einenu tzofios. Phil knows this all too well. November 9th, 1938, over 1,200 shuls. I have 2 volumes upstairs that records every synagogue that was destroyed that night in Germany and Austria, in the Sudetenland, that part of Czechoslovakia that was controlled by Germany. Almost 1,300 shuls were burnt, were destroyed. Anything that was a standalone, they burnt it to the ground. The synagogue for my town, because it was too close, it was next to Gentile buildings, so they didn't burn it down, they destroyed it. The German Catholic community, in the area where we come from, Unterfranken, Lower Franconia, near Würzburg, it's not primarily Lutherans, it's primarily Catholics. So about 20-some years ago, they fixed up the shul. They had pictures from the survivors, and they redid the shul the way it was. And they have the mikveh. So that's one of the few that's standing till this day from my town. But most of them they were burnt to ashes. Zaku shamayim v'adama. May the heavens and the earth cry out, not just cry out, but evoke us to cry out. Al alfei ayaros mitzvei Torah. The thousands and thousands of towns, villages, and cities in which Judaism was lived, which it was flourishing in. When you go to Yad Vashem, you have to go to the Valley of the Communities. The Valley of the Communities is a maze in which the goal is in the Jerusalem stone to get lost. You get lost. This part is Germany, this part is Galicia, this part is Eastern Galicia, this part is the Czechoslovakia, this part is Hungary, this part is the Carpathian Mountains, this is Poland. And all you do is get lost and lost and lost in maze. And you look up, and in that Jerusalem stone, the big cities are carved in big carving, the mid-sized towns in mid-sized carving, the small shtettlach, the dwarfs in small carving. And you can't imagine the thousands and thousands of villages, cities, and towns that were annihilated, Jewish communities that are no longer. Artsos Europa ukihiloseha, the lands of Europe and its communities. Nochaleo mekaime misora, those who inherited, those were the ones who kept the tradition, who passed on the tradition. Tzadikim, Zakenim, v'chasidim, righteous ones, elders, learned ones, chasidim, those who went above and beyond. Deveke Emunah Tahora, those who clung in pure faith to your values, to your principles. Miyom galinu me'artzenu lo haya kazeh ki lo yonora, from the day that we were exiled from Jerusalem, of all the tragedies that we mourn on Tisha B'Av, there was never ever anything like this. Rachem, last paragraph. Have compassion al she'eriseinu. Have compassion on our remnant. Habeitna min hashamayim, please look down. Please be involved in concern from heaven. Lamachanos hakadoshim, to the holy communities. Pi eser kiyotze Mitzrayim, 10 times those who left Egypt were murdered. Komem Beis Kodshenu, please God, erect our holy temple in Jerusalem. Bring us back to Israel. Bring us back to the holy city and the holy temple. V'nachamenu b'kiflayim. Console us, don't just console us. So alluding to the famous verse from Yeshaya Hanavi, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Console us, console us. We need a consolation above and beyond human imagination. Ramamenu, enable us to stand up. Enable us to erect ourselves from this tragedy. Vavienu l'tzion, Yerushalayim. Please bring us back to Zion, to the Beis Hamikdash, and to Jerusalem. That, very short, very brief, because if you and I would talk from today till the end of history, we could never describe the impact of the Holocaust. And the survivor, the Baba Rebbe, said it in very, very brief terminology. But I think he encapsulated the sense that we, the Jewish people, have, the need that we, the Jewish people, have. Who knows what we could have been had it not been for the destruction of the Holocaust? Who knows? Till this day, 75 years later, we still haven't rebuilt our numbers to what we were in 1939. And that is one of the few that we have written for the Shoah, for the Churban, that we say every Tisha B'Av. I'm sorry, guys, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about sad things. It's 3 weeks. I actually started a week early. I apologize for that. God willing, starting next week, we're going to have much more upbeat topics. I'm going to have Nancy send out on the mail list, the link for Tisha B'Av. I can't go to Atlanta because our team, I'm not going to quarantine a whole team for 14 days. So last week they came to the house. I got 7 hours. On Tisha B'Av, we got 7 hours of material. Some of the things that we did together, and I thank you for helping me, build up to Tisha B'Av through our shiurim. But we'll have that on Tisha B'Av, and you can click it on demand, or you can watch it on the website, whichever you like. You'll see the link for it. I want to wish everybody a good evening. The reason we're stopping now is because Mincha Ma'ariv for many of you is 8 o'clock. So we want to give people a chance to get to Mincha Ma'ariv. And I just want to hand it over to Isaac. Isaac, I can't thank you enough, not only for always setting it up every week, but also for putting the material on the